Okay, well, let's put that aside and do our first reaction to a recent video from SevyPlays. I do watch this person for some guides and stuff like that. I like to watch different guides to see what the conclusion is for certain characters and stuff like that. Otherwise, I actually go to I went to Lose Gaming for my primary source of like guides and stuff like that as a means to build characters in Genshin. But I like SevyPlays. I like her takes on it, at least from the videos that I've seen. And yeah, so of course, with a lot of content creators within the Genshin community have been, taking a look at this, and here we go. Our first reaction for, at least on stream anyway. But first reaction for somebody's video. All right, here we go.
Hey everyone, it's Sevy, and it's been a while since I've done like a face-to-face conversation, chat, video type thing. I've been dealing with
I
a
have
lot
watched the
IRL
first
while
few
trying to
minutes
keep
of
up
it
with
just to
content.
make
I'm
sure.
in a new room and the light just went out, but thankfully everything else is still functioning. Today I wanted to talk about the GameSpot article slash interview with the Genshin Impact devs that kind
Yes.
of had a part of the community, me included, quite disappointed, frankly. This
Mm-hmm.
interview had to do
Myself
with
as
a
well.
lot of things post version 3.1, but the part that stood out was the Genshin devs discussion about endgame content, which I will
Mm-hmm.
expound on in a little bit. And before I get into that, I would like you to know that if you don't know my content or me that well, I'm not the type of meta slave player that is obsessed with like min maxing stuff. Like, yes, I do make guides on how to use characters well, describing pros and cons of a character, team composition, building, things like that. But I'm not the type of person who will tell you to not use a character because they're bad or because they're not the best.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe in enjoying the game how you want to enjoy it.
Of course.
I also don't solely play Genshin just for the combat. I really enjoy Genshin's story content, their exploration and open world content. There's a lot of the game that I enjoy. But
Right. So as I in my video, my own video about this topic, I explained that yeah, the combat is a big part of it, but that doesn't mean, you know, that should be the primary focus on things. And a lot of people have been saying or having counter arguments against the combat aspect of things, where if a lot of people think, oh, if they focus on the combat, that means they'll take away from the story, all the other content that they enjoy, rather than the combat itself. That's not the case here. That's not the point we're trying to make here. The overall problem is that they're neglecting on a huge part of the game, which is combat. Like, what again? Why else are you building these teams? What is the point of getting the weapons? Why are they even weapons in the first place? You know, why are there reactions? Why are there elemental reactions? Why are there elements that you use in such a battle-esque purpose? Right? There's combat, and combat is a huge part of this video game. And so people who try to like counter argue that, I just find very strange, because they're arguing over such a huge part of the game besides the exploration and the story and the art direction, the anime-esque direction and everything. It's like, it's just so weird to me that people just don't want more stuff, to me, because it means there's more stuff to do. And if you want to ignore it, that's fine. But why? I don't know. It's like, why would you want to ignore a huge chunk of what the game is, right? Or what the game offers, combat. And it's, yeah. So it's just something that I still find it a mystery of why there are people out there that have such counter-esque views when it comes to the combat side of things.
I firmly feel and believe that combat is a central part of Genshin.
Right.
Genshin offers multiple ways to enjoy the game, and I do enjoy it in multiple ways. But the combat system is arguably a very, very big part of it, and
Mm-hmm.
there is a significant part of the player base that draws a lot of enjoyment from it, which is why I think this topic is worth talking about. So I'm
Mm-hmm. Of
going to be
course.
throwing a bunch of opinions out in this video that you can disagree with me on. You know, you don't have to agree with what you're seeing in this video. Obviously, if you disagree, then, you know, you can be nice about it. But anyway, this is like a conversation about Endgame. And the thing is, Endgame has been a topic of conversation for actually a long time.
Oh
Genshin is
yes.
reaching its 2-year anniversary. It's been around for a while. It's still been at the top of the market, and it has held its place there. And Endgame has been a continuous conversation, whether you're part of it or not, whether you're a casual player or like a hardcore player or somewhere in between. The discussion has been there. And I haven't really chimed in because honestly, up till now, in my head I was like, surely with all this discussion ongoing, with the community talking about it almost constantly, surely Genshin devs know that it's something that a part of the player base is looking for, right? Like,
You
surely they
one would
would
think
make something maybe at the
normally.
2-year mark. And here we are, and not only do we not have new combat based endgame content, but this interview drops where they basically say they don't have plans for it, and then they give a reason why that is honestly very quite flimsy in my opinion. Again, you don't have to agree. I'm going to show you the quote,
Flimsy
and
is a
then we're going
very
to
good word
dissect
for
that.
it,
So
I'd
yeah,
say, to
it's
describe
come
this
to this point where I
overall
am choosing to chime in and choosing to throw out my
view
opinion out
from
there.
Hoyoverse, or somebody from Hoyoverse.
All right. So, all that being said, I think we can start talking about exactly where the issue is. Looking at the article, I'm going to be highlighting this question and answer in particular. It reads, are there any plans to release new permanent endgame content in the same vein as the Spiral Abyss? And then the Genshin devs answer this by starting with, the Spiral Abyss is one of the most effective ways for players to test out their party composition and combat strength. I agree. It is. Guide makers and combat focused players, we use Spiral Abyss as a standard to test a character's and team's power level. It is the hardest challenge right now in the game. Beat X amount of enemies in a given amount of time. The faster you can do it, okay, the stronger you are, or maybe the more skills and strategies you know in beating it. The devs know that it's effective. The devs know that it's there to measure power level. And then they say, if we design
And they
another
know
type
they
of permanent endgame that is
and guess
similar to
what?
the spec.
Guess what? They know that we want that kind of content. They know we want it. They know we love the combat aspect of Genshin. That's what makes it all the more like. I know I keep saying all the more, but it really shows of all the more ignorant that they are, or they sounding ignorant. They are in this particular instance.
Spiral Abyss, it might end up creating excessive anxiety for our players. Not everyone is interested in Musk Reef. Okay, I can agree with the last part that not everyone is interested in Musk Reef. A huge part of the Genshin player base is casual. That's fine. Like, the
Right, and of course we have to make that clear that not everyone is into the combat, and like she said, it's totally fine. But there is a huge chunk of it, and the point being is that why would you ignore that part of the part of Genshin, right? It still is a chunk of what Genshin is the combat. Besides the story and exploration and the few enemies that you fight, right, within the overworld or whatever, the actual world of Genshin, yes, you still do fight enemies, but they're rather well, depending on where you are, there'll be a point where you'll have no trouble finding them, and that's just what it is.
these are players who log in do dailies, spend a bit of resin, log back out, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't care if the resin caps. That's completely fine. Not everyone is interested in Musgrave. Valid. True. But what they're saying here, the first part of that second sentence, if we design another type of permanent endgame that is similar to Spiralibus. Now, you can interpret this as them saying that we're just not going to add a floor 13 or a floor.
Yeah, yes, yeah, that's also true. This is a good point to point out too, and we do want to. It's a little healthier to think of it this way. Like, you know, sometimes a lot of people, or no, a lot of times, a lot of people like to just come up with one conclusion and just stick with it on the internet, and that's the narrative they want to stick with. You know, thus the whole like how this is how it all leads to like the whole cancel culture thing and just the outrage culture within that you see on the internet. They want to just sometimes people do that on purpose just for whatever it is. Like they if they want to create content out of it, or they just want to feel that way because of what is going on in their real life or whatever may be. But that's just how it is with a lot of people on the internet. They just want to just stick with that one conclusion. They want to feel that that way for whatever reason, and that's just how it goes. But in this case here, as she is trying to point out, that this could mean a number of things. Not just like, oh, we're just not gonna do content that does vaguely is similar to Abyss. So no time attack, no survival, no this and this or this or that, or boss rush, this or that. It doesn't necessarily mean that. I think it's just the way it's worded, or they worded it, or maybe it could have been a translation sort of error on somebody's part. As I did point out, I think by the end of the video, but it is a good point though. It could mean a number of things, right? So they could mean like, oh, we're not gonna add stuff to the Spiral Abyss itself, but at the same time, the way it's worded on the surface here, yes, I can see why it would be interpreted in that way, but it would at least be a little healthier to try to think of it in other ways too. But this sort of train of thought is very consistent throughout this whole this article here. Is also a problem.
Or 14, or the Spiral Abyss is not going to get taller or deeper, however direction you put it. You can interpret it that way, and that might be a safe and perhaps literal interpretation. And at least that still gives us a bit of hope for more endgame content. But the
Copium
thing is,
and copium,
they
I guess.
started that paragraph by describing a certain characteristic of Spiral Abyss, which is that it is most effective for testing out power level. And if that's the characteristic they are choosing to highlight, well, in the same paragraph saying that they don't want to make permanent combat-based endgame content that shares that characteristic, that is similar to Spiral Abyss in that sense of that characteristic, then that interpretation, which is the one I'm capitalizing on, is indicative of them saying that they are probably not going to make more combat-based endgame content. Yes, you can interpret it either way. You can
Right.
interpret it
So
the safe route, like find no more Spiral Abyss floors. Yeah, okay. But then there's this whole thing where it's been 2 years. They have run several combat based events, limited time events, over these 2 years, and yet none of them have become permanent. And maybe you can say that this has been a long time coming. We knew this in our hearts. They have had no indication, no sign of introducing permanent endgame content. It's only now that they're saying it out loud that we're getting confirmation about it. Like, okay, maybe that's fair, but it's still disappointing nonetheless.
yeah, it definitely is still disappointing. It's like I thought about this a lot times, and basically it's going to be I think Genshin Impact is going to be something like of Fate Grand Order. Like what is there to do in Fate Grand Order, right? The main thing is just the story. And what else do? You just go through the hands or whatever, the fucking, what do you call those things? Anyway, you fight the hands, get the experience, you farm material from all the other various chapters and whatever, right? The the worlds that you go through, or all the regions and stuff like that. You just farm material from there, just like you would with the Hilichurls and stuff in here in Genshin, right? You fight various enemies to farm those material, just like you pretty much in a similar fashion you would in Fate Grand Order. The only new content the only content that there is available elsewhere are the events, and they're not around for forever. They're there for a limited time, and so it's like a very same vein in that sense. And I think this is just gonna be a 3D Fate Grand Order. If that's where they're gonna go with this, if that's the direction they want to go. Which I'm not entirely unfamiliar. You know, it's something I've done in the past. I've played. There was a point where I played Fate Grand Order a lot, and of course with the money and everything with the gotcha. And so that's like the pattern I've noticed, that it's very similar with this game. If I wanted to make a comparison. So it's just so funny of how much of a parallel there is with Fate Grand Order in this game. The only thing, of course, is the combat, right? I mean, this one's like real-time action, and then with Fate Grand Order is turn-based, right? But the outcome of it, and a lot of the outcome is pretty much the same. It could be, you could say it's 1-to-1, because at the end of the day, they want to make money, and that's just what it is. It's there to just make money, and it just it feels like all the more like they're just here to make money and not really care about the essence of video games. They're not here to celebrate video games. They're just here to make money. That's all there is to it, it seems like. Which is unfortunate because, again, I really do like Genshin Impact for the story, the mythos, the characters, the world to explore. I also love the combat, and then for them to say something like this is very disappointing, and at the same time it kind of worrisome too, because it's like, why, you know? But hopefully things change. But
not only
let's
is it
continue the video.
but honestly, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense because, in my opinion, they have no reason to not add endgame content. I know that they cite the reason here, which is that it might end up creating excessive anxiety.
That of course everyone's been talking about that part, anxiety. It's been a meme at this point for a little bit at least, but it's just so dumb for somebody from the team to bring up anxiety in that sense. Oh, now you're suddenly caring about anxiety when the games like this are built around anxiety. They're built around the FOMO. You're literally tapping into the psychology of players in this game. That's literally how it goes, right? You only have this much resin. What are you gonna do with it? You gotta farm up this material on this day, right? You gotta take time out of your schedule. Oh shoot! If I don't farm for this material on this Tuesday, I'm gonna miss out, and I have to wait till Sunday for everything to open. A lot of gadget games do very similar things with this. Even Fate Grand Order does the same thing too. Oh, you can farm XP for assassin classes or assassin servants on this day. You know, that's an example. Very similar. Now, granted, you can use that XP for everyone else, but of course that XP is going to multiply if you use the assassin XP on assassin classes, of course, or assassin servants, of course. Pretty straightforward. But here, of course, you don't have anything like that, I don't think. And you can only farm for certain books, certain weapon ascension materials on certain days. So if you miss out, it's just more time wasted, and you're just not making good use of it, thus creating, that anxiety from one source within this game.
But we're going to come back to that. The reason I say that it doesn't make sense is because Genshin has such a rich, complex combat system. I don't play a lot of games, honestly, but a lot of the creators that I talk to, creators and players in my chat and in my comments, they they say that Genshin has one of the arguably best combat systems in the market right now. And
It's really sad too. That's another sad thing about it, about this whole thing is that this is a gacha game, right? So for a lot of gacha games, the combat is very simplistic, very simplistic. Turn based, you just point and click, and a lot of those games have the auto battle feature. So you just let it just go, and you just kind of just do your other thing, like going on Twitter and stuff like that. You're not even really looking at the game. You're not really actually playing the game. You're just kind of just there. It's kind of like a farming thing. You're literally just it's a farming machine. You're just farming for resources with the given resources that you have, which is which is the resin or the stamina in most other gacha games. And that's how it normally goes. But for a game like this, along with Honkai Impact Third and funny enough probably other games, few other games have real-time combat, and those ones are the ones that probably will likely to stick out more and be more fun in that sense. It's more active. You're constantly hitting buttons and stuff like that. It's much more engaging in that sense, right? There's a place for everything, right? Turn-based isn't so bad, but a lot of gacha games are turn-based because there's so much. I'm pretty sure there's so much simpler to develop. But for such games like this, and even within that, I think Genshin Impact does have the most fun real-time combat system out there. Now, I'm just going off of what other people say. I haven't played Honkai Impact, but I've played a good number of action games back in the day, and I think this holds up. Like this for a gacha game, for gacha RPG, this competes with a number of those JRPGs and such like that have real-time combat. For a game that's supposed to be free to play, and of course, most of the money it comes from the battle pass and of course the character banners, which again creates more anxiety. Anyway, back to here. It's so sad because this has some of the most fun combat systems I've played, and of course, as someone who has played a number of gacha games, this is the most fun I've had with the combat. And it's just so sad that they're not doing anything about that. It seems like at the time, in this moment, and they're saying, "Oh, we're not gonna, do anything similar to Spiral Abyss or something like that." So that could be interpreted again as we're not gonna even touch that. So it's just sad that they're not even like considering adding more to it somehow in some way. They're not even capitalizing off of it. That's just what's sad to me.
as someone who makes guides on the combat system, like I agree. This is a combat system that is made of 4 characters in a party, and you can only use one of them at a time, and you have to make them work together. It's based on different element types, different weapon types, different characteristics, different skills, talents, different mechanics. There are even hidden mechanics that are involved in the combat system that players can discover for themselves and learn to exploit and use in combat. They have numerous aspects and facets to it, such as weapons, artifacts, artifact bonuses, builds, stats, things like that all enrich this system. And then they have reactions. I haven't even mentioned reactions yet, and the reactions are super cool. Okay, like the reactions even before Dendro have been such a trademark, such an
Right, and let's not forget the rotations, right? How you order your characters it also plays a huge role in your combat. So it's all the more sad to see something like this because there is a good amount of depth to this combat system. Like she has mentioned, the artifact system, how you build your characters, right? There's like several ways to build them. You can even like do meme builds and still do a good amount of damage. There's a lot to it. There's more to it than meets the eye. Definitely. Let's continue.
Interesting part of the combat system. You can use like vaporize, melt, freeze kinds of things, and it's all these are just various mechanics that you can use in combat. The combat system is there, and it's there to be enjoyed and played with. And that is my first reason for saying that they have no reason to not add more endgame content. My second reason has to do with resin. All right, so let's talk about resin. We have resin, it caps at 160 a day. You replenish that resin over time. And you can spend primos to refresh your resin, to add more resin to your supply. Because what do you spend this resin on? Well, you can spend it in domains.
Yes.
You can spend it on bosses.
For the rewards, yes, you can. You could still fight the enemy, right? You still fight the enemy without resin technically, so they might just come out with that low blow and say, oh, but you don't actually have to spend resin on the to fight the enemies there. But when it comes to the rewards, though, yes, you do have to spend resin on the rewards.
You can spend
I should have probably clarified that in the video, but nonetheless,
on ley lines. These domains, they can farm talents, they can farm artifacts, they can farm weapon materials. Everything that you spend resin on has to do with increasing a character's power level. You don't spend resin to make a character look prettier. You
no.
spend resin so that you can farm artifacts, which aren't even displayed on the character, but they do make the character stronger. Like, you don't spend resin to, for example, get more furniture for your teapot.
No.
You spend resin on a boss because it's going to level up your character, because it's going to make them stronger.
Right.
And resin is a very fundamental thing to Genshin Impact. It's one of the trademark things about a gacha game. You know, it's like you're
right. Like how you suppose, like how there's gonna be a point where you will have to fight a boss in the story itself, and if you're not strong enough, how are you supposed to get through the story? You see, and if you don't care about the combat, for people who don't care about the combat, what is that? What's that? What is that saying now, right? What are they gonna say now? If you don't care about the combat, like, I mean, to an extent, you do have to care for the combat, and don't you wanna have a good time doing so to level up instead of having to just like, okay, spend 40 resin for the bosses to level in order to get the materials and stuff like that. Get this material, get the stones, right, and of course get the boss material in order to help level up. And so for them to say they don't care, I don't think. I mean, I honestly think they're a lot of times they're saying that to solely disagree on the content creators they don't like, right? It's just that's a whole nother story. But back to the point where it's like, oh, I don't care about the combat and blah blah blah, but don't you have to do the combat? Don't you have to care about the combat to some extent in order to get through the story? Now, yes, granted, there is going to be a point where, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy once you get there. But yeah, guess what? You got to level up in order to make it easy, right? So, again, don't you want to have a good time leveling up, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to allude, or that's my point for this whole thing.
Stamina system. It's this thing that is a limited currency that you can use every day to farm materials in order to make your character stronger. Stronger in combat. And resin isn't the only thing that does this, okay? Banners, characters, weapons, okay? Yes, having a character in itself is very much a pleasure. It's very much an enjoyment. Like, Whether you spend on it or if you save for it, yeah, great. If you pull yourself a character and because that is your comfort character because you just love your personality, then that's awesome, right? You have a brand new character that you can play with. But for example, a big reason or a big part of characters are their constellations.
Right.
These are things that again you have to spend.
That's another. This is another point, right? Why the hell are there constellations don't when the devs really try to point out that they don't care about the combat? What's the whole point then? What's the whole point behind being having these characteristics being blocked behind constellations such like that? We have to get more characters. Why we even have to do this when combat isn't something you want to emphasize on?
A limited currency for this time primos, sometimes your actual money. You spend primos to roll for characters. There is no other way to obtain them except for the free characters. You have to get them on a banner, and the only way to roll on a banner is to use primos or like the free intertwined or free standard.
Again, and that's also to say, oh, we don't want to create that anxiety, right? But you are creating anxiety by doing this too. This constellations alone, it's like, oh man, I have C0, but should I go for C1? Right? They're conflicted because they want to spend their money or more of their primos, because you gotta save up the primos to get more characters, right? If you want more characters in your roster, like it's just everything about this is just so contradictory. Like it's just so blatantly ignorant of whoever said this in the interview, and of course that's why people are mad about it. People are understandably very upset and soured about this whole thing.
Fates that they sometimes give. You get these characters, you get their constellations. What do these constellations do? They make them stronger. They make them better in combat. These are combat improvements. Okay, you get multiple refines of a weapon. It makes it stronger. It makes it better in combat. All of these improve.
Oh look, another thing, a fucking event exclusive weapon. Oh, but we don't want to create anxiety. Oh, fuck that.
Obtainable.
Oh, that is it's just.
They are designed.
Wait, was just
to
almost stupid.
Better equip you for combat. Okay, like you don't pull Ito constellations because they make his arms more muscular. If they did, I don't know, maybe he would be C6 by now. You don't pull constellations for Zhongli because it's going to like make his voice deeper, even though that would be very attractive, right? You don't pull constellations for Yae because it'll change her skins or appearance, and that's another thing. Even though Genshin has skins, like wow, how many characters can I actually dress up here? Oh, I can dress up like 6 characters in one extra skin they've provided out of the 50 plus characters. Genshin isn't even like an aesthetics focused game. It is very exciting when they introduced skins, but for example,
yeah, so that, I mean, while skins is very optional and I can kind of, I'm willing to look over that or overlook that or look past it, but yes, it would be nice to have more skins. That's another thing as well.
Skins aren't something
that's another thing they've been kind of lacking.
A lot of other games
in that
skins
department
are something that you can buy or you can grind for, or that you can achieve from like the battle pass or whatever. Here in Genshin, you achieve them through limited time events or through straight up paying for them. The main thing that you are,
again, these skins are, some of those skins are event, well, quote unquote event exclusive. Like, oh, if you don't get this skin, you can't get this skin for free, and they'll be in the shop, but you gotta pay money for it.
Are grinding in Genshin, that is resin. These are
combat. Yeah, actually pay
and
actual money
to me just
if you don't
of how
do the event.
System is to the fabric of the game, and that is one huge reason why I just don't understand why they wouldn't make more content that revolves around that and that services the players that are heavily invested into that combat system. You can argue that, well, isn't that what Spiral Abyss is for? Yes, it is. That is what Spiral Abyss is for. But the fact that it's the only thing that is there, the thing is, most other gacha games have different forms of combat based permanent end game content.
Yeah, I believe Honkai Impact has some sort of. I believe, funny enough, Josh was talking about it. Was a or was it someone else? I don't know. Might be mixing people up, but there's endgame content to that too, and that's funny because it's from the same fucking company, right? It seems like that game is gaining more love in more ways than one than this game, even though this game is like making tons of money, and they're flexing about that too. Like, oh, we got an anime. Oh, look at these concerts that we got. All the collabs and merchandise and all this hoopla or whatever, but they're not covering the most basic shit in video games, which is just more content, more in-game content.
It's not just their Spiral Abyss, they have more things, more challenges, more cyclical, repeatable content because they know that just one form of it isn't enough. So why can't Genshin do that? Why can't Genshin do the same? And it's true that Genshin offers more than the ordinary gacha game. It's open world, it has like so much more in terms of exploration, and then the story is there too. It's a huge game, but it is still a gacha game, and they will devote resources to those other aspects of the game, but then why stop devoting resources to more endgame combat based permanent content? And this doesn't mean like them putting more resources into that shouldn't retract from other aspects of the game. I mean, it's not going to make the story weaker. You can see Sumeru. It has a well written story. They put in Dendro, and it's a very good addition to the elemental system. It's working great. So like, why stop there? The combat system is one thing that draws in players.
Right, that's another point, right? I forgot to mention that, right? It's like if they don't care that much about the combat, why even add Dendro besides the lore wise? But what is what's the whole point of adding Dendro? Why was there so much anticipation for that whole thing? And the people from Hoyoverse were hyping it up too. It's like, why? They know because people want to have the reactions, right? The more reactions, and they even were showing it off too. Oh, you can do this with Electro. Oh, you can do this with Hydro. Oh, you can do this with Pyro. So again, it just shows more clues and obvious cues that they know, they are aware that people care about the combat, and they're neglecting on that on purpose for some reason.
It draws in interest because, again, there are a lot of attributes to it that make it worth exploring. So why not make content that rewards that interest and exploration into it? Combat for that part of the player base, content for that part of the player base. And if other gacha games can do it, then why can't Genshin? Let's talk about another form of endgame that has been like continually getting updates. This main form being this.
Yeah, the thing about this is that they've already made the content. They just have to just incorporate it permanently. I don't think that'd be a difficult implementation at this point.
Serenity.
Again, they're being willfully ignorant about it.
Serenity Pot is a good addition to the game. It's endless fun. Like, if there's some part of Genshin that has aesthetics focus on it, it's the Serenity Pot, because you can infinitely revamp your furniture, your outdoors, your indoors. You can change the setting completely. And yeah, you can use it to get rewards like I'm doing right now. And the thing is, the teapot, it keeps getting updates, like permanent optimizations and improvements. Like, for example, just this patch, I'm pretty sure it was just this patch. They've updated it so that you can just automatically clip. You can automatically make furniture overlap with each other. Now, why am I talking about this? Because this whole clipping thing, this is something that teapot enthusiasts and teapot builders have been, it's a they've been doing tricks like exploits or hacks to actually make it happen for themselves even before this was like naturally allowed in the game. This is something that players have been doing themselves. And I guess the devs decided to implement it naturally because it is a good idea that players had. Players wanted to do it. Players were doing it. So, like, why not put it in? They put in an improvement that players wanted, clearly wanted, because they were already doing it. So, it's like,
Yeah, so she's adding to the point where that they do look at feedback and they actually do implement that into other places, but when it comes to the combat itself,
why can
they've been more likely to ignore it.
they do
Again, this
that?
whole ignorant thing is just
But then
all the
not
more
give
it's
more
very much more
to
aggravating.
end game combat based content that players have been talking about probably even before the Serenity Pot was implemented. So, taking that thought and then accompanying it with, again, the fact that you have all this resin to spend on character improvements, these incremental increases in your character power levels, like, okay, you get a new artifact that has a better substat and then it improves your character's power level by like 1%. But if you've already beaten Spiral Abyss, if you can already do it under time, then where really can you feel that 1% improvement, or where can you enjoy that character improvement? So
Right.
you see that Genshin is investing so much into the combat system. They even say in this interview that the Dendro reactions, they introduced more complexity that they are trying to work with. Yeah, there is a lot of complexity there, and they are investing so much into it, and they make players invest into it because once you reach like AR 58 or AR 59, what else are you spending your resin on if not building the characters you haven't built, or further improving the characters that you already main, right? Of course, I'm not talking about the entire player base. Again, we know that a large part of it is casual, doesn't care about the combat stuff. But I would argue that like it's not the entire player base that pays attention to their teapots either. And yet, as I've said, that teapot has been living the life, the dev's favorite, okay? The combat based endgame content, you can argue that they've been putting that into limited time events. Like every version, or almost every version, one of the limited time events is a combat based event. And you know, those game modes are nice. They introduce different mechanics like limiting the teams that you can use, bringing in
Yeah, like this is just like yeah, in just another like point that they're like, oh, but we. It kind of goes back to it is gonna come up in the resin cap question, but like that's how they're like in their eyes think they're pleasing the players. You know, the combat people, the combat-esque players, by introducing these limited time modes. Like, oh, we have these modes in these events. We're keeping the game fresh by doing that. So you just play those events. Play those events to fulfill your need for new types of combat modes and content and such like that.
new buffs and debuffs, bringing in different types of enemies, bringing in different types of waves of enemies, bringing in different stages to the combat itself. Like they introduce all these new things. They even introduce like roguelike events. And these are fun. Like these are enjoyable. Sometimes they introduce one and it's really good. And a lot of content creators and players will be like, hey, this should be endgame content because it's actually really good, because it's actually really enjoyable. And the thing is, for a while, like I thought they were introducing these events so and then collecting like survey feedback about them so that eventually one of them could be turned into end game content. Yeah, you
One
could
would
argue
think that
that
normally.
maybe that feedback was just to improve it for the next time it reruns, but then it's like it feels kind of wasted because you could also use that feedback to create and develop more content that is permanent and can be enjoyed by the rest of the player base. Because also remember that when it's limited time events, not everyone is going to be able to enjoy that content. New players are likely not going to be able to enjoy it because maybe they're not in the region that is needed to access that. Maybe their characters aren't strong enough to even get rewards, and hopefully they'll stick around until the next time it reruns so that when it does rerun they can get to know it, they can feel it, right? But then they wouldn't have to wait for the next random time it reruns if it were permanent content. So why not choose a blueprint out of those endgame versions and make it permanent? One could argue that, well, if it's permanent, people are just gonna get bored of it again, like Spiral Abyss. And that's fair. If you get bored of it, then okay, you're gonna stop doing it, but at least it's there for the people who aren't bored of it, right? But it being permanently accessible, would at least be an improvement over it just not being there. Spiral.
It just gives you more stuff to do, like whether you're bored of it or not. Like once you're not bored of it, you're gonna like play it again. There's just stuff to do, right? I mean, don't just video games in general like become quote unquote boring, or you're gonna naturally move on to something else at some point. But then when you come back, sometimes you have that feeling, oh, I want to come back to this game. Boom, there you go, right? Don't you want that kind of feeling? You have something to do when you come back, instead of like, oh, this mode is not here because it's not in this limited time mode. When I come back to this game, I have to wait, right? Whenever I do feel like it, oh, I have to wait for this fucking mode to come back. But then by that time, it's like, well, I've lost that feeling or motivation to come back to this game because this particular part of the game is locked behind some sort of time exclusive event. So
This in itself, again, it's a good form of endgame content, right? It's kind of standard. But there is
it
a
is
part
pretty
of the player
standard.
base that can just breeze through it. Maybe because, I don't know, they've been building their characters over the last 2 years that Genshin has been out. You can breeze through the Spiral Abyss, usually just using like the national team or a variation of national team. And then the other side is like, I don't know, a freeze team, probably. Now that they've introduced Dendro, sometimes you can change that up. But like the national team is just so good that you can use it for almost any type of content, right? My point is, not only is Spiral Abyss the only thing, the only endgame combat based content that we have right now, but also it doesn't necessarily incentivize you to enjoy different characters and teams. And again, like the various characters, teams, and reactions and team compositions are a huge, rich part of the combat system. And yet, you can just use the same characters to beat Spiral Abyss. I'm not saying that this is inherently a bad thing, because obviously it's good for those who don't want to go through the trouble of building new characters or go through the resin of building new characters but still want to reap the rewards of Spiral Abyss, right? That's completely okay for them. What I'm saying is that the opportunity is kind of wasted there in Spiral Abyss if that's all you need to beat it with, right? Like imagine endgame content where it doesn't just give you a blessing that strengthens a reaction, but it actually restricts you from using certain characters. And the thing is, we have had a limited time event like that. There was a limited time event where you could only choose one character to carry over to the next chamber. And that was actually cool. That actually like brought a bit more deliberateness in thinking about your team composition, in my opinion. That was an enjoyable combat based content. And then again, why not just make that permanent? Why not just choose something that players really liked and just make it permanent?
Why not?
Maybe
That is indeed the question.
you're
Why
the type of
not?
person that does just prefer that these are limited time, that these are rotating, that they rerun every few patches, that you have to wait like a few weeks in between. Maybe you like it that way. Maybe you like that there isn't always something to do. But I feel like if they made it permanent, you also wouldn't necessarily feel like it's always there to do. Between Spiral Abyss and limited time events, I actually feel a bit more stressed or lazy or dread doing limited time events because I know they are limited time. Spiral Abyss, I know, is always there. Even if I miss the Primo Gems out of this cycle, I know it's just going to reset and I can just go back to it.
Right. So yeah, creating permanent content it is not creating permanent content isn't going to create anxiety and whatever the fuck they're so worried about. And in fact reduces it because they know it's there so they can play it anytime they want. And it's not like it's locked behind resin. You can play it anytime you want just to fight the enemy. So if they're so concerned about that, it's like, then why do all that fucking limited time shit? Again, why do all the fucking gacha and shit? You know all about anxiety. You use that you use that as a means to sell your game, to crunch up those numbers in the money department.
Those limited time events, I know that once it's over, I can't get those rewards anymore until like I guess the next event that comes back. But the fact that it is limited time, it actually makes me feel more FOMO than missing a Spiral Abyss cycle.
Exactly.
Because I see the countdown timer. It's like 7 days left. Okay, I'll put it off for 3 days. 4 days left. And then I start dreading it because like I don't really like this pressure that comes with having to complete it in X number of days and then the event is gone forever. And then that's like the only opportunity I have to actually enjoy the event. For example, I kind of had to cram the last event. I had to cram it in one night because I was busy with stuff, and I wish that it had been around longer for me to enjoy it. At least if it were permanent, then it would just come back and be there for us to enjoy at any point in time. I want to talk about that FOMO thing though. Genshin, in this interview, they stated that creating that type of permanent endgame might end up creating excessive anxiety for our players.
Yep, she's gonna say it.
I understand that there can be various sources of that anxiety relating to Spiral Abyss, whether it's because of the rewards or because it's just too hard.
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, in this particular instance, or in this particular point, she's trying to say, or like a counterpoint. I don't think it even matters because they, again, no matter how you look at it, it's pretty contradictory of them to say that they're worried about anxiety. Again, they use that as essentially a weapon to meet their ends.
Hard because you feel like if you can't beat it, then you're a bad player, or people, or because there are players out there who are mean and then bully others for not being able to beat Spiral Abyss. Some of those reasons have to do with people being mean in general, or parts of the community being mean in general. That is their fault. That is not the fault of the people who actually just enjoy the content and then aren't.
And you know, it doesn't matter if, you know, bullies or whatever are gonna use that or not. They're just gonna find other ways to bully players as a means to like maybe gatekeep them or just make themselves feel better about make themselves feel better, whatever it is. They want to stroke their ego and whatever. They're gonna find more ways than one to achieve that.
Mean to anyone for it. That's not the fault of Spiral Abyss either. In my opinion, Spiral Abyss is arguably like something that you can kind of control. As in, you can control what teams you put in there, you can control how you play, and
Josh, you have the people in Genshin community are some of the most moronic people I've ever seen in my life. Like people like just get mad over the most minor fucking shit. Kind of similar to a few other games. Like one of the recent ones, one of the recent instances is where there was someone's birthday, right? Like the character's birthday, right? It was Ayaka's birthday, and and you know, Genshin always puts out a picture, right? Like an artwork of whatever character's birthday is, right? And it comes from like various artists that have their time on Twitter, and they're very well known, like they're likely to be well known, blah blah blah. They're famous, right? So they do the art for it, and sometimes, or in this particular one, because Ayaka looked too young or something like that in that person's style, people were fucking like furious over that shit. Like what the fuck? Like I don't know if they were like death threats or anything like that, but they were just dumping all over that artist, and it's just like, what? Like these are just anime characters. Like, what are you so worried about? Look, main. What are you so worried about them being young looking? I mean, they're young looking no matter what. Like, what why are you so worried about that when the when the original shit is like that too? It's just, yeah, the point being is that they're just like they just like do this dumbest shit in the community. So they just get mad over the dumbest shit ever. And a lot of people like nitpick at this thing, like, there's a lot of racial issues, even though it's like there's context behind it, there's a reason behind why this is part of the story. Like, people aren't, they just take it at face value and just run with it, which I kind of made a point early on. So I don't particularly have like an instance of gatekeeping I remember in my head, but that's pretty much that's the mentality of it, right? Like, it's just the whole like anger mob thing is just it's just really dumb, and they do it for the dumbest reasons.
And once you get to know the waves of the enemies, yeah, sometimes there are layers.
Yeah,
of
it's very,
RNG,
very corny, very corny, to say the very least, and that pisses me off too. As someone who appreciates art, and sometimes draws, but I want to get back into it. But anyway, I appreciate people's art a lot, and to see shit like that, it just pisses me off because there's just a bunch of hypocrites.
Because you couldn't predict it as well, but because you can control the characters and the teams and then your character builds and what you actually throw into Spiral Abyss and how you play, that level of control, it's actually, it's up to you. To me, what gives you anxiety are things that you can't control.
The Nessa thing, yeah. No, I mean, that's people have problems with like dark skinned characters too, for some reason. For various reasons, I guess.
For example, these things.
But yes, it's pretty much like no matter how you look at it, it's
like,
very much similar to that sort of mentality.
Artifacts and then
like the Nessa incident.
The that you want, but then it having shit.
It's just very stupid.
That is sad. That is frustrating. And then getting a good artifact with like 3 good substats, and then it all rolls into the 4th horseshit substat.
Oh yeah, another thing, right? About the anxiety thing, the fucking artifacts, right? The substats. Why even have this? What's the point of this horrible RNG behind these substats too? When you don't want to create the anxiety. Oh, when you don't care that much about the combat. Like, what's the point?
Now that
again, what's the point of a lot of these things?
Because these are things that are like out of your control. And you know what? You might be numb to the feeling at this point. Because like if you're a very late AR player, then you've probably been doing this for a long time. And you've probably been rolling artifacts for a long time, and then you're like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just a part of it. But like, come on. Genshin's RNG artifact system, if there is one thing that they could like alleviate anxiety on, it should be this. Make it somehow a bit more predictable. And again, this goes back to the point that we're spending all this resin to get the perfect artifact, to get the perfect build, and for what? For what more content other than Spiral Abyss?
Yeah.
Anxiety inducing.
That's a good point too.
Like, you can talk about anxiety inducing maybe because you feel like you're too casual or too low AR of a player to finish that endgame content, and at that point, honestly, like, you shouldn't care because you're just not at that level, and that's completely fine. Like, if players are at that level, then they can get the rewards, but those are extra things that you can get at your AR at your level. Those are sufficient for you. If you're an AR 20 player and you can't get to floor 9 of Spiral Abyss, where like the AR 50 plus players are, then you don't have to worry about that. Because enjoy the rest of the game. Like, enjoy building your characters. It's a process. You don't have to feel anxious about the end of the process if you're still going through that process. If you're a player that feels anxious about that, then okay, like your feelings are valid, but it's anxiety. The fear of missing out. It's fear. It's like literally a fear, which is like almost the closest thing to anxiety. The anxiety of missing out.
FOMO is anxiety. It pretty much is. It's the exercise. They're exercising the exploitation of people's psychology. That's just how it goes. This gotcha games is just one exercise, one giant exercise of that.
Aomo. You know, missing out on banners, missing out on limited time events, missing out on primos, missing out on characters, missing out on weapons. This is a gotcha system. You wish for things and it's RNG. They have a pity system for you because they pity your fear of missing.
Yes, the pity system too.
Out.
That's anxiety. That's engineered behind anxiety.
Worried if they're actually worried about excessive anxiety from part of their game content, then they would fix part of their RNG. Not
right, exactly. If they're so worried about exercise, or if they're so worried about excessive anxiety, then you'd do something about the gotcha, right? But no, that's just no. Obviously, because that's a big, probably the biggest flow of cash, right, for the game. So obviously that comes off not only as like contradictory, but it's very, very hypocritical too, in that sense.
Stop adding more endgame Genshin endgame combat based content. In comparison.
Oh, but we don't want to add. But we don't want to add this combat content because anxiety. We're so worried about the players. Now you're worried about the players? Fuck off.
Their RNG.
Fuck off with that weak ass shit.
Business model. That is a drop in the ocean. Now, you might be wondering, what should that in-game combat-based content look like? Honestly, I'm not a game dev. I did already talk about how I feel like they've been making blueprints for upcoming or for possible potential combat-based endgame content through the various limited time events that they've already been making, right? The blueprints are already there from the various versions. It's just like pick one, make it repeatable.
Blizzard makes excuses like this all the time for WoW.
That's your content, right? So maybe it's just
another company that exercises anxiety and
again, I'm not a
creates FOMO and all that stuff too.
Game dev, and I don't have as much experience.
Very out of touch. Very yep.
For those of you,
very much so,
who have a clear idea of what kind of endgame content,
and they know it. They know that people want the combat. They want, you know, fixes like that. They know it, but they're gonna willfully ignore it to meet their agenda.
Below. Personally, the recent combat-based events that I enjoyed were that Sumeru Potions one. I really liked that. I liked the waves of enemies, and then you get like the buffs that you have to activate and stuff. I liked the Hidden Strife event, Deluxe event. I thought that was pretty fun because it was like I could do rotation after rotation, and I can feel when a rotation doesn't work. I can feel like when my energy is short, and when it does work, it's so satisfying. When everything comes together, when your DPS is like in its perfect DPS window with all the buffs laid on him. For me, that was fun. Maybe you're into Hyakunin Iki. Maybe you're into the Labyrinth Warriors. Maybe you are into those, but then have like a suggestion on what you would improve on them. Maybe you're a co-op player. There's also that. Genshin has a co-op capability that they have.
Yes, that's another thing too, right? The co-op stuff. Personally, I'm not. I really don't mind the co-op thing. Like I don't care too much about it, but at least it's there. But at the same time, there's not all that much to do because of the lack of.
I've not brought into endgame content.
Combat
Where is
stuff.
Permanent win trace? Where is permanent win trace? Like having permanent co-op endgame content would be so cool. Not just for farming domains, not just for open world shenanigans.
I mean, hey, I don't care about co-op, but hey, I mean, I won't be so opposed Is one of the videos you mentioned. Oh, okay, okay, that's funny. um,
Co-op endgame content. Where is it? Tell
I
me
don't
in the
be so.
comments
I wouldn't be so
you would
opposed to
look
them
forward
adding
to.
stuff for co-op.
That's really
But
how
people out there are just like, oh, but you should be thankful, blah blah blah. Like you should,
I feel
you want to
about
ignore combat shit.
their answer here, because they said afterwards that they referenced the TCG, which I'm excited for. I want to know what it's
I
gonna
don't
look
care.
like.
I honestly don't care about the TCG,
I'm
but
curious what the TCG
hey, I mean, if you're
is
looking
gonna
forward
be
to it, more
like,
power
and
to
I
you.
really hope I get to
I
enjoy
get
it.
it.
But they also
Trading card
basically
games
use
stuff is,
TCG
there's a fun. There is
as
a
a reference to how they are
there is
focusing
fun
on different types of endgame content
for
that
people,
isn't combat based. Whether it's TCG or the teapot or I don't know, fishing. Basically, that's where they're putting their resources in. Yeah, it is disappointing that they aren't, or at least they haven't disclosed any plans for putting resources into extra end game content. You could argue that Genshin is just being secretive. They don't want to mention anything that they can't promise. They don't want to prematurely leak or announce anything. They wouldn't want like someone on their team to leak info before it's ready. I get that. I get that they don't want to have some kind of empty promise like the Nintendo Switch thing where
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the one of that's one of the big questions they miss is where the hell is the Switch version,
where's
right?
Genshin on Switch, buddy? And maybe they just want to save it for their live streams.
Yeah. See, that's like a lot of what people hope for is that, and I've talked about this with Baka and stuff, in the chat, but like it. I think this whole interview was something they didn't want to do at all, but because they're kind of like put on the spot or something, they just send out somebody from the dev team to just answer the questions as best as possible and be vague about it or try to be vague about it, but at the same time, um, this just did more damage than anything. I feel like they should have just straight up just ignore them if it would have been a lot better, I think, overall. But I don't know. I guess they were pressured enough somehow, or they were paid enough somehow. I don't know, man. I actually don't know what drove them to even do this if they don't even want to answer the questions so enthusiastically, right? It was possible that this is all just kind of like a red herring or ruse or whatever, and hopefully we actually do see something that would be really cool, and so we can like ignore this whole thing or overlook this whole thing, right? But right now, it's just leaving a very very bitter taste in our mouths, and it's not looking good, right? Because the way things were answered, it was just very contradictory. It just shows their sort of hypocritical sides to it and how somebody is incompetent at least. They think they were smooth about it, but at the end, they're pretty smooth-brained about it. Is my take on it.
when it's all ready and Mr. CEO Dawe can announce it in full. They are very articulate in their live streams when they're ready to discuss something. It's very exciting. I very much enjoy seeing the game dev
Oh yeah, for
and
the sake of the future games, I want to play. I want to try out Zenless. I want to try out Star Rail. And whatever the fuck anime first person shooter they're gonna develop at some point. I hope they don't do that.
marketing whatever and their marketing personnel like actually talk about the content of their game because they say so much about it. They managed to say so much about it. And I'm really annoyed because this interview, like at the start of the interview, the subtitle is "We spoke with the developers to learn more about what's coming after version 3.1." And then you read the article and then you learn nothing. You learn nothing about what is coming after version 3.1.
Yeah, this is a bit of bait. Like, it just sounds like they were trying to fish out something, but I don't know. Um, I don't think any of them wanted to do this interview.
Except for TCG, which they already announced in the live stream. This interview, honestly, it was pointless.
It kind of was.
And if
It was. It just did more bad than good,
was
if
published so
anything.
that it could disappoint players in the way it's disappointing like my corner of the community, then fine, they succeeded. I don't know why GameSpot would publish this interview because it had no
I mean, it did something, that's for sure.
substance except for Hoyo being
I guess it exposed the mindset of somebody in the development team, but
evasive, vague, dodging questions, just not willing to discuss any info because maybe the questions that they were being asked, maybe the answers were just premature. Maybe it's true that it is all just in development. And if that were the case, if I were the interviewer, honestly, I would have sent a different set of questions instead of publishing something that just says we have plans. The plans exist. Genshin
the parallels of Hoyoverse and Blizzard right now are wild. Man.
like that's basically what the article says. Genshin, yeah, they have had a problem with communication, and you can read this both ways. You can read it as them being problematic about the way they said this, but you can also read it as them clearly stating that they just have no plans to add in more combat-based content. Permanent in-game combat-based content. Wow, what a mouthful. I'm not going to act like it's the end of the world. Like, obviously, life goes on. This is a game. It's a community.
Right.
It's just one.
I'm still gonna play the game. Don't get me wrong, because I really like the characters. I'm pretty invested in the world or the story or whatever, especially with the Fatui, 11 harbingers or whatever. So I'm pretty invested in that part, in that sense. So I'll be willing to stick around, but it does feel disappointing that they have actually come out and said this, and thinking that this was a good answer.
Aspect of the game. It's not the end of the world. There's still a lot left in Genshin to enjoy. The stories, the characters, the music, the exploration. I'm really, really, really enjoying Sumeru. It's like the first time in so long I've been motivated.
Business is a business. They're out here to make money. That's the mindset they're all gonna go for, no matter what.
But it also means that
Nintendo, Sony, they're all out here to make money.
Genshin Impact anytime soon. And honestly, if what they say is true, that they're not gonna add more combat-based permanent endgame content, and if that means that getting those incremental increases in power level are gonna become more and more pointless, I don't know. Maybe that means that there will be less emphasis on combat. Maybe I can make more content aside from just Genshin combat. Maybe there'll be other Genshin things that I can make content on. Because yeah, Genshin is a very rich game, but the combat system is also just so good. And why waste that? Why put a cap on it? Again, just give me your thoughts in the comments. I'm very interested to know where you stand. If you're a casual player, if you're just starting, if you're a new player, if you're a 2 years player, if you're an AR60 player, if you're a C6R5 player, where are you at? Again, you don't have to agree with me, but it's a conversation. It's a conversation with dialogue.
Funny that I actually was able to hit AR60
really wish and hope
right around I think the anniversary time.
Be part of that
what
conversation.
What a weird like coincidence almost. It's almost like poetry.
It made us feel like they aren't. So yeah, that's going to be all for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll see you soon.
Yep, that was from SevyPlay. So good video, I'd say. That's definitely just speaks volumes of how ignorant they're willing to be to get their shit done. But like she's been saying, this could all be just like kind of like being put on the spot. It's kind of like with Marvel Infinite, right? Peter Rosas, aka Combo Fiend, talked about the functions thing, right? It was a meme at some point, but you know, things like that, when you're put on the spot like that, it happens, right? You tend to kind of just start saying stuff and just comes off very, again, ignorant and kind of like, you know what I mean, blatantly blind or whatever, however one would like to put it, when you're put on the spot like that, especially if you don't like to do interviews, right? Like, I feel like those things happen commonly. Those sort of slip-ups do commonly happen. um Sometimes it just exposes the mentality of how the development cycle goes, or for the team, for overall. Or I don't know, it could also be just a genuine mistake, but you do what you gotta do to avoid any like spoiling or anything like that. You just gotta come up with something, right? And you just gotta take the damage sometimes. But no one wins, right? No one wants to hear that kind of stuff, and no one wants to talk about it. So yeah, I think this interview was just bait for GameSpot, but it was also something that unfortunately exposes some of the mentality that has been consistent throughout the I guess career, you could say, the Genshin Impact career for Hoyoverse, or miHoYo slash Hoyoverse. It's funny that Josh brought up how similar it is with WoW, with another big game that has similar elements, right? With I'm sure there's like armor pieces and such like that with stats and such, and limited time events, and you got if you don't. I'm pretty sure there are events where it's like, oh, if you don't farm for this mount or whatever within this time window, you're gonna miss out, or other mounts, right? They have very much of a lower percentage, which is why there are times where you're just like farming it for a very long time. Let's just say you won't, you just want to get the mount, right? So you're gonna spend a lot of time on it, and that is for them to help engage the numbers, because they want to keep the player number high, so they do that kind of stuff, which in turn creates that FOMO, the anxiety. I think even then, like, even if there isn't a time exclusive thing, I think it just creates FOMO in general, right? You just want to get that skin. Oh, you want to get that thing, right? So that you can show it off to your friends. Same thing happens with Fortnite. A lot of kids get the Fortnite skins, and you have that one person who can't quite afford things, and the kids are just like, hey, I got this skin, hey, me too, it's so cool, blah blah blah, what about you? No, so sometimes you could be made fun of or whatever, and either way you kind of feel left out, and you want to get that skin and such. Things like that can happen too, but in this particular case, though, it's all about the time exclusivity. It's all about the FOMO that's created. That's how they calculate stuff, right? And then, but but we're so worried about creating excessive anxiety when it comes to combat content. Really, it's just the whole game is built around anxiety. That's just what it is. That is just what it is, man. And that goes to all the other gacha games, man, that I've experienced over the years. They all have one thing in common, and that's that they all try to fuck with your head, man. But hey, you know what? When a game is fun, I'll play it, I really do like the game. I like the characters and all that stuff. I'll be willing to stick with it. And one thing I will say is, and I've already said this in the video, is that it seems like Hoyoverse likes to very much keep it in locked in key, right? Keep it in the safe. Don't say anything until they say it on their platform, right? On their special program. Kind of like Nintendo, I guess. Which is why you don't really hear anything from them when it comes to interviews. That's why video game companies don't want to talk about shit in interviews. Like this, you don't hear stuff exclusively from an interview, for the most part. Sometimes, yes, you do. Sometimes things slip out. You know, the actors are just like, oh, maybe I'm totally not in this project or whatever. You know, sometimes actors fuck up too. What's his face? Tom Holland, right? He accidentally spoils shit. That's just the kind of person he is, unfortunately. But it happens. You know, not everyone's so perfect. But you know, people like to kind of tease around that. Sometimes they're good at it, and they like to, you know, sort of tickle that fancy almost. But anyway, back to the point. Sorry, back to the point with Hoyoverse. I noticed that they're kind of like that because, you know, for a very long time, Electro was kind of like the inferior element, and people wanted that element to be buffed. Hoyoverse just didn't respond to that for a very long time because they already had Dendro implant. Dendro was pretty much, I don't know if it was exclusively designed for Electro, but the reactions with Electro were gonna be really good. So to the point where if you did buff Electro just from the outcries of, you know, the community, I think it would have been too powerful. Maybe potentially, I think it would have been likely too powerful, so that, you know, you do just want to run Electro and Dendro, and that's it. You know, that was going to be the new national team, which is, I believe, Xiangling, Bennett, Xingqiu, and then whoever else is the fourth, right? Especially with Raiden National. That's like cracked, I believe. Still, Raiden National is super cracked still. But anyway, point being is that they have plans. I'm sure they have some things in store that they want to reveal on their platform, and that's pretty much it. So I hope that's what it is, and they're just here is just like giant one. It's just giant fluff. Unfortunately, poorly worded. But there is some stuff to take away from, and it's kind of just how they see things, right? So it is what it is. I'll keep playing the game, and that's all there is to it. So that's it on that. Hopefully this interview will just die off because most of the questions will be irrelevant. Hopefully, because hopefully they'll have content for us to enjoy permanently. You know, besides the TCG stuff. But yeah, hopefully there is something else to it.